Hey gamers, today we're going to be talking about the most common ship that is designed in Space Engineers, and that is a combat ship. Um, we have a lot of ships, for example, here today. This is already going to be a very information-dense video, so sorry if it runs a little long. We're not going to be talking about combat meta. We're going to be talking about designing your ships around whatever you think your meta is for your lore, world, whatever. Just to make ships look good, but still make sense. Because it is a field of building that has some of the most trade-offs. Um, so, as you can see, I have a bit of a problem with building cruisers. Um, we'll we'll get to that. There are dozens of considerations when building a combat ship. How heavy do you want it? How are they going to build it? How expensive can it be? How's it manufactured? Who's going to pilot it? What are their priorities? This first one that we're looking at is the Papal Carrier. Its job is to be fancy. It is essentially a flagship. Its job is to tell you, hey, we are powerful enough to do whatever we want. It's designed for atmospheric operations. It can land on these poor little landing gears. Each of these has its own elevator, and it's designed to just carry fighters on it. This ship is not really meant to see combat. It is very light. It can be chewed through by one of these cruisers very easily. And these hangar bays are rather small. So in my own combat meta, this is not a good combat ship. But that's not necessarily its job. Its job is to look menacing, and it's very large. It looks heavy, and it's got enough guns on it. We really wouldn't want to mess with it. The more combat-centric ship that's significantly better is, of course, the Paradise gunboat. A combat ship really just needs to be smartly laid out. Hydrogen tanks aren't stored right below your turrets. And there's a lot better tutorials for combat meta than what I'm able to give you today. But considerations for its design. The Paradisians, they value their citizens' lives and will go at great cost to defend those lives. So this is a blockade ship, so all the guns face outward, or in this case upward, but this side would face the outside of the blockade. So you'd know, hey, this is the line. If you get any closer, you're probably going to get 50 artillery shells into your fuselage. Ships of this size should have at least one hangar, because these ships will struggle to deal with nimble fighters, and that's one of the biggest trade-offs between something like these cruisers and a battleship is mobility. Heft versus mobility has been a debate since the beginning of naval battles. Do you put all your money into a giant battleship and just have bigger guns? Or do you build a small mobile ship that can just outflank the artillery guns? And this is completely up to you. There's no right answer. An example of this other than the cruiser would happen to be my first combat ship. My first ever ramming ship. I designed this thing years ago. And it's not a looker. I've designed it to look better in the modern day, but there's just some charm about how simple this is. Its job is, it's a boarding ship. It's got that little passageway up there. None of it is airtight, because this was designed back in the day when airtight was incredibly laggy, so why bother? Oh my god. So now, theoretically, if any part survived, our crew, which is stored down here, whoa, yeah, so we would board through the hole here, jump in here, do what we need to do, how they're manufactured, and what the cost to repair is. This thing is a big metal brick. It is, for this particular faction, the steel is cheap, components are not. So the bit that was destroyed up there was pretty much all steel. We did lose a couple ion thrusters, but just look at the cost to the Paradise. This is immense damage. The Paradise can still live on, but this pierced right through. It probably would have killed a lot of the crew. And also having a big ship crash into you would probably be rather terrifying, especially in the galley, where they're probably not exactly ready for that. But yeah, the considerations of cost and logistics, I would say, are the most important things that I keep in my head. How much does it cost for us to engage? Is it worth it? You're not going to see a whole lot of Paradise ships ramming into cruisers. That would be insane, because this is a very expensive ship. And this thing suffers. Every time one of these fights one of these cheap mass-produced cruisers, this thing loses in terms of logistics and money. Sure, it wins individual battles all the time. That's what this thing is designed for. But if we're talking about pound for pound, financially, they are losing money. They are losing money slightly less. That will win a war. The country funding the more expensive ship will just straight up run out of money. We have a lot of considerations for small grid too. We have kind of a little carrier here. Sorry that it's ugly. And this is not the most recent version of the Paradise Fighter, but this comes from the Paradisians. They value their individuals more than they value money, so they deck them out with a lot of turrets. This is not a well-designed ship in terms of combat, and it doesn't look very good, but it was my first large small grid fighter. But if I were to design this again today, everything in the back would be elevated and it'd be made slightly cone-like, because that's what the meta is. My cockpit would not be nearly this exposed, because what's the point in having all this just to have the guy right there? And we have a little bomber thing down here, because this thing's job is to destroy outposts. Its job is not to engage with other fighters. It can, but it comes back to the cost thing. This thing costs significantly more to operate per hour and per bullet received than the short-range fighter. This thing costs nothing. It's just, I mean, it's kind of expensive. Compared to this thing, if I could trade one of these, a death of one of these for a death of one of these, that's a fantastic trade. And that's why I think when you're building small grid, you generally don't want to go this big unless it makes sense. Small grid is more for disposable fighters, things that really don't cost a lot. This really should have been a large grid, but hey, it was early on. And small grid, I think, has some of the highest variety as far as roles go. You can really get into some micro niches here. This thing's a blockade runner. Its job is to get cargo from one side of a planet to another and not die doing it. So it's got an incredible amount of thrust, given how small it is, and pretty much all of its moolah is spent up here on this top plate. So this thing would hug the ground as close as possible, and it also has some skis down here. These are frictionless wheels. So it can survive tapping the ground a little bit. So it skirts along the ground. The camouflage is, of course, terrible. The top plate's pretty fugly, but it's got its job. So a blockade runner's job is not really to engage with combat. This church fighter is just, I've shown it before, it's just a little fighter. It's mainly for aesthetics. Its gyro is kind of hindered by the fact that it's got these hinges on there. But it will hold its own against a fighter of similar size. Not cost. This is a papal fighter. These are mainly what's going to be flying over stadiums to show off force. they're not real combat ships, so I didn't put a lot of consideration into armor. Here is my favorite type of combat ship. This isn't my favorite ship, just my favorite type. This is the Rumman 2, a series of Rumman ships I built. It's pretty well armored, and it's a quote-unquote cargo ship that just so happens to house a bunch of rockets. It very much kind of looks like a cargo ship with the orange and the big helipad, and you look at this thing from this angle, it's like, okay, it's got some turrets on it, but, you know, it's an anti-piracy cargo ship. What happened here? Oh. Smart design choice? What the hell? I'm not used to that. So if we hop down here, this is a lot bigger than I thought it'd be. But that's horrifying. So theoretically, you sneak this into an area, say, yeah, I'm just delivering cargo, and we've got this big open thing right there for any spare fighters or even to actually carry cargo. And not all combat ships have to be good. This is an example of a police car, and I just love how crazy this thing looks. But it's technically a combat ship. It's got a couple guns on the front, but its job is not to completely obliterate everything it sees, and its job isn't to do absolutely crazy shit. Its job is to take down speeders and the occasional burglar. So it's really got 2 Gatlings and a big cannon to knock people's thrusters out. Only build a combat ship for what you need. You'll notice in my videos I say that a lot. Only build for what you need. Anybody can build a giant dreadnought that can take all sorts of damage, has all sorts of systems, missile pods, everything in it. But in order to keep that price down, because price and logistics is really where most of a war happens. To keep that price down, build specialized ships. You can have general ships, but just know the specialized ships will always beat out the generalized ships. And now finally I get to talk about the mainstay of my combat meta, the cruiser. I've posted about these a lot. They are modular large grid fighters. This thing is actually just a race vehicle. And this is a command vessel. This one has a little bit more firepower, but this kind of goes against the mantra of it's a bit more expensive. Its job is to manage a fleet, not to actually participate in combat necessarily. But it is a little bit more souped up than its brethren. But it's a lot less repairable. This right here is what my entire combat meta is focused around. Very easy to repair, very easy to print, and very easy to cause an insane amount of damage to whatever targets you have. It has a shrapnel ram, because the consideration for this thing is it is a dreadnought killer specifically. Could you put that ram on a cruise missile and save a lot of money? Yes, but that's just not as personal. And I'm not here to do meta ships. But it still does quite a bit of damage. Now there's a bunch of shrapnel in there, hopefully. These little bits will break off, so I'm using decorative blocks, panels, and these little pieces break off in here. Yep. So you see a couple of them survive. This is a very heavy ship, so it's very rough. So when this thing moves again, even if I miss the hydrogen tank, there's now a bunch of shrapnel in here. As soon as this ship tries to move again or maneuver, all of this is going to move back and blow up my hydrogen tanks. That is the job of a shrapnel ram. And there are several different types of ram I've built. I've just found that this is the most efficient dreadnought killer. Now, your combat meta can be completely different from mine. That's fine. You might care more about how turrets are laid out, because the most effective shape is a cone. To increase your DPS. You might care more about heavily armored ships for long, drawn-out battles that are just hurling artillery shells at each other. You might like the railgun. I personally don't use the railgun all that much, but you might like the railgun. You might like stations. It's a creative game. The only rule that I'm going to say is necessary is that within your own universe, the meta has to make sense. The examples a lot of people use are naval battles, to make aircraft carriers, destroyers, and I really do think that's one of the best ways to classify your ships. But realistically, you can say class titty fucker, and that's still your goddamn ship. You can call it whatever the hell you want. My god, that thing caused a lot of destruction. Hold on. Jesus Christ. Let's rip the side off of that. That's not a very good ram, I say. Your Shit. Your combat meta is entirely up to you and what you want to design. I'm only going to say that it makes sense in your universe. If your people, or your lore, or whatever, are super rich, and this is equivalent to a small fighter, then that's fine. That more power to you. But then, what's the trade-off? I guess the trade-off would be that nobody uses fighters, because why would you? If everyone's piloting one of these, why would you ever use a fighter? Just keep things like that in mind. Of course, for testing, I have to ram every single ship into the Paradise. It's just really necessary for the content. I'm not doing this because I'm having fun. One more little tangent about your combat ships is I really want you guys to work on your interiors. Something I've noticed about combat ships is that you just kind of throw the cockpit on a bunch of thrusters and make it work. And this is okay sometimes, but how long do these pilots plan on hanging out in these ships? So if you're going to be on a ship for a significant amount of time, you need a larger ship, or you need a better designed interior. She really wants you to subscribe. She's begging you, actually. Look, yeah, she really wants to give you one. She's not being bribed at all. She just really wants, she really wants you to subscribe.